Tell us about your company, controlling technology with your mind. It sounds like science fiction.
So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Precision Neuroscience. We are developing what's called a brain-computer interface. A brain-computer interface is a medical implant that allows people to control computers using only their thoughts. Sounds like science fiction, but actually it's been validated in academic work for 20 years. So the first person was implanted with a brain-computer interface in 2004. And since then, there have been nearly 70 people implanted with various forms of sort of academic type prototype devices. But they've been able to do amazing things. They've been able to send emails, create digital art, play video games, all using only their thought. But so far it's really been confined to academic settings and, as I mentioned, sort of prototype type devices. We are part of a small group of companies that is taking the science that we know works, productizing it, and taking it through the regulatory process so that it has the potential to reach the many millions of people who stand to benefit. The company that I co-founded, I did so with Ben Rapoport. Ben was one of the co-founders of Neuralink. He's also an active neurosurgeon. We co-founded the company almost 4 years ago. And in that period, we've designed and now manufactured a cutting-edge new system. We've validated it. We've tested in 25 human patients across 3 medical sites in the United States. So we're working at Mount Sinai here in New York, Penn Medicine in Philadelphia, and West Virginia University. We've been granted breakthrough device by the FDA, and we've raised over $140 million from some terrific investors.
And talk about who this is for. I know Precision right now is focused on the medical aspect of it.
Yeah, so our initial focus is on people who have severe paralysis. So this is people who can't use their arms and hands, in some cases can't speak. And this is as a result of generally sort of spinal cord injury, diseases like ALS, and certain kinds of stroke that leave the cortex intact but disrupt the connection between the cortex and the rest of the body. There are about 400,000 people in the United States alone who sort of fit that description, and about 30,000 or so new patients every year. How does controlling a computer with your thoughts help those people? It may sound a little bit unintuitive, so maybe I could give a real-world example.
Sure.
So 2 people on our patient advisory board are Jules and Maria. Jules was diagnosed with ALS 4 years ago. ALS is a very cruel disease. It basically, people who have ALS, their brains remain totally cogent, but the brain's ability to control the muscles in the body deteriorates over time, initially with sort of the limbs and leading to all of the musculature. It's 90% non-hereditary, so really ALS could happen to anybody. And Jules, now 4 years on, has a tracheotomy, so he's unable to communicate at all. The only way that he can't communicate verbally. The only way he can is through what's called eye gaze technology. So he stares at letters on a computer screen and hovers over them and at select letters, but it's incredibly slow and frustrating. So he basically can communicate a few words per minute. It would be like having all of your communication through an Apple TV remote, unbelievably frustrating. And as a result, he sort of self-censors. It's awkward to have people wait around for minutes to extract a sentence, so he just curtails his own thoughts. We asked Jules, why in the remaining time that you have, would you dedicate it to us and helping inform our product? And basically, he listed 2 things. The first is, Jules and Maria have a 7-year-old son, and he would like to be able to speak at a normal conversational rate with his son in the time that he has left. And the second thing is, he'd like to be able to have fun, play video games, and do other recreational activities with his son. So, controlling a computer with your thoughts, it sounds maybe a little bit abstract or perhaps even trivial, but I think for a certain group of people, it has the potential to be totally transformative.
And let's talk about that technology that could potentially help people like Jules. I know you brought a chip with you. It's thinner than a piece of human hair, so you guys might have a little trouble seeing it, but
yeah, here it is.
Tell us what goes into this.
So you can see here, it's incredibly thin. It's a fifth of the width of a human hair. And on this, it's basically, it's thinner than a piece of Scotch tape. Here, you can hold it if you want. We deposit 1,024 microplatinum electrodes on the array, most of which are about 50 microns in diameter. So that is the size of an individual neuron. You can't see it with the naked eye. The way that we manufacture these chips is borrowing manufacturing techniques from the semiconductor industry. We use photolithography in order to make these chips, and that's actually that's never been done before. Borrowing manufacturing techniques from semiconductors for a biomedical application. So we've had to acquire our own fab in Texas. We have a 22,000 square foot facility with a level 5 clean room in which we make these devices. The way it works, I'd say, to try to simplify it, is you can think about that electrode array like a very high resolution camera that is taking video in sort of 4K of the awake human brain and using the brain signals that it's picking up to correlate to an intended action. So for example, a certain group of neurons fires in a certain pattern when I want to move my right index finger. A different group of neurons fires in a different pattern when I want to move my left hand. And that's basically the building block of a brain-computer interface.
Interesting. And your approach is different than, say, Neuralink, which you mentioned, Ben, your co-founded alongside Elon Musk. Talk about the different approaches between Precision and Neuralink.
I think it starts, we have fundamentally different missions. If you look at Neuralink's website or speak to the co-founders of the company, I think their stated objective is to create some sort of symbiosis between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. That's a fine goal and maybe a very important one, but it's not our goal. I mentioned earlier that Ben is a neurosurgeon, so we are a physician-led company. Really built into our DNA is a focus on safety and patient impact. The goal of this company is to make a really meaningful, positive difference in people's lives. When Ben left Neuralink and we started talking about starting this company, he was convinced that a brain-computer interface needed to have 3 attributes for it to ultimately achieve the sort of widespread adoption that is our objective. First, it should be safe and non-damaging to neural tissue. So some competing approaches to this technology, including Neuralink's, involve doing some amount of tissue damage upon implantation. And Ben's view has always been, that's ultimately going to be an impediment to widespread adoption. So the precision system sits on the surface of the brain, underneath the skull and underneath the dura, but on the surface of the brain without doing any damage. The second thing is reversibility. So, should people want to have the device explanted for whatever reason, should they want an upgraded system over time, the system should be reversible also in a safe manner. And finally, it should be high bandwidth. So you can think about a brain-computer interface as a communication device. And just as any communication link, bandwidth really matters in terms of what you can achieve, what the function of the device is. And so, our system is architected to be very, very high bandwidth. All that said, I think this is an industry that is going to be very large, and there's room for multiple approaches. We don't think this is a winner-take-all market. So I think there's room for more than one approach to this.
And as you mentioned, you guys are minimally invasive, less damage to brain tissue, less chance of an infection. Why aren't more companies taking this approach, or are you guys losing out on something by not inserting into the brain?
I think I'd say 2 things. I'd say, first of all, the implantation that we've patented at Precision involves a very minimally invasive slit in the skull that allows the array to slide through like a letter through a letterbox without doing sort of a craniotomy, which is what most of the competing approaches require, removing a large piece of skull. And I think that having a co-founder as a neurosurgeon who thinks about the actual mechanics of how do you get devices into the brain in a safe and scalable way, I think it's a huge competitive advantage. I think, in terms of the underlying sort of technology and the fact that our system is non-damaging, when Precision was started, I think that there was a commonly held view that you actually had to penetrate into the brain in order to drive a powerful sort of brain-computer interface function. I think our work and actually some of the work that's come out of academia in the past several years has really proven that that's not the case.
And we're going to have some video that shows the precision chip tracking a human brain. Can you explain what we're seeing? I understand it's going to be a patient saying 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Right there.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we've done 25 human implants. Our most recent was just on Friday, so this is happening actively. And at different sites, we're able to do different protocols, which are really validating the safety of the system, that we can implant and explant it safely, and the fact that it's working, as well as training the algorithms to be able to do the decoding work that is at the core of a brain-computer interface. Here, this is a speech protocol. So someone who is implanted with our system is saying a series of words. And we are recording from the part of the brain that controls the motor cortex associated with the mouth and the tongue. And so we can see, we can hear what they're saying, obviously, but without hearing what they're saying, we can see what muscles are being activated in what pattern, and we can use that to predict what words the person is saying or thinking about saying.
And what about the dangers? The brain is already such a sensitive part of our body. On top of that, you're introducing a computer, which aren't perfect machines. What if it malfunctions? Can it be hacked? Are there privacy issues? All
super important questions. I think from a sort of, what is more sensitive to us than our own neural data? The data security and data privacy questions are really built into the regulatory regime that the FDA enforces. This is a highly regulated industry for good reason. And it's not the case where companies are able to move fast and break things. The FDA is very prescriptive in terms of the data security and data privacy issues, as well as the fact that we operate within the HIPAA regime. But I think there are issues that are kind of specific to brain-computer interfaces. And one of the ways that the industry is tackling that is through something called a collaborative community, which is something the FDA helps convene, which really is intended to bring together a lot of different stakeholders in an industry that is in the process of sort of emerging, such as this one. So, it's industry. Precision is one of the 5 founding charter members of the collaborative community, but it's physicians, it's patients and patient advocates, it's the payers, so public payers like Medicare and Medicaid, as well as private insurance companies, but it's also academics and ethicists. One of the focuses of the collaborative community is outlining sort of the ethical landscape in coming years. And I think we're really lucky to have some of the world-leading academics and bioethicists and neural ethicists associated with that project. What I'd say just on the question of ethics, just to sort of keep in mind, my perspective at least, is that we're trying to deliver a patient benefit to people right now who have nothing available to them. And I think the ethics of doing that for the time being are pretty straightforward.
And I've heard you mention this Morgan Stanley report that says the BCI industry is a potential $400 billion market, estimated about 5 years away. That's allowing for procedures outside of the medical world. Talk about that potential customer. Why would somebody like me or you or someone in this audience want to get this surgery on the skull?
So I think that there is growing recognition that this is going to create a large industry. I imagine that's why I was invited here, and that's also why Morgan Stanley, I think, wrote that report, despite the fact that there are no listed companies in the space yet. The way we see this industry developing is initially for people with very severe paralysis. So I mentioned people who can't use their arms and hands at all, and in some cases who can't speak, and that's about 400,000 people in the United States and about 30,000 patients every year. We think that creates a $2.5 to $3 billion initial market in the next few years. From there are a lot more people, there are about 5 million people in the United States who have some form of motor deficit. So maybe they can use one of their hands but not the other, or maybe they have very severe arthritis that prevents them from being able to operate a computer or a smartphone or a tablet in the way that most people can. As this technology becomes more and more commonplace, as the idea of people controlling computers with their thoughts becomes sort of less fantastical and something that people just see more commonly, I think there will be some adopters from that 5 million pool of people who will decide that they want this technology. And I think, beyond paralysis, there are hundreds of millions of people globally who suffer from neurological illnesses that right now either have poor pharmaceutical therapies available or none. We can't say with the same level of confidence that we will be able to address other neurological illnesses. We know that paralysis is tractable because there's been 20 years of academic work that prove it so. But we are creating, in effect, a high bandwidth link between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. We think it's very likely that there will be applications for that go beyond paralysis. And we're excited to work on them in coming years.
And on the AI side of it, it's not perfect yet. There's a lot of inaccuracies. How does that impact the BCI sector?
Yeah, just going back to this idea, so it's been 20 years in academia. Why are we talking about it now? Why is it becoming an industry now? I think it's common for new technologies, first of all, to gestate in academia for a while, and also they really need to wait for prime time until some of the enabling technologies that are critical to its sort of commercial rollout, to their being ready. And I think that's absolutely the case here. So you think about material science, for example, of the array itself, being able to manufacture something that's biocompatible, that's high resolution, that's going to last in the body for a long time. Same thing with the electronics, being able to miniaturize really powerful electronics to process the signals that are coming off the array, to digitize them, and to do so in sort of a low power environment. That's also, I think, innovation that's really happened over the course of the past several years. But AI is absolutely, a great example of a technology that needed to be developed for this to become an industry. Just to try to quantify it. So our system is designed to have 2 of these arrays on the brain at the same time. So that's 2,048 electrodes or sensors in total. And we are sampling from the brain, or we're measuring the brain's activity several thousand times per second. So that's 2,048 sensors, each of which is measuring brain activity several thousand times a second. That translates to billions of data points per patient per minute. So that's way more data than any human being could possibly compute. So AI is absolutely critical in really decoding that neural activity and making sense of it.
And what about the regulatory roadmap? You guys just filed for FDA approval. What are the challenges and where are you in that process?
This is a global industry. And there are a few promising companies in Europe. China has explicitly made brain-computer interfaces a focus. It's listed as a technological priority on the most recent 5-year plan. Still, in spite of that, 80 to 90% of the innovation and the capital that's being raised is in the United States, which is great. Why is that? I think there are a few different reasons, but one of them really is regulatory, where the FDA is by far the most sophisticated in terms of sort of the global regulatory regime in advancing this technology. The person who leads the neuro division of CDRH, which is the part of the FDA that regulates devices, is himself a former brain-computer interface researcher. Many of his colleagues are as well. And the FDA has been really proactive in helping to define the regulatory landscape for us and for companies like us, including issuing draft guidance as much as 5 years ago. So, I think the FDA in this case is a real asset for the United States. I think we need, any new technology like this needs a very clear regulatory roadmap that is spelled out by people who really understand the technology itself. And I think it's really lucky that we have that in the United States. As you said, we have submitted our first FDA application in August. We are hoping for our first clearance in early 2025, which is really exciting. It will be for a temporary version of the system, one that has to be used in the hospital and for up to 30 days. I think this is an important milestone for us and for the industry. We will be able to start selling a device, so generating some revenue, which will be great. We'll also, be developing a reputation and a relationship with all of the stakeholders that are going to be important for the rollout of the long-term implant. So the clinicians and the nursing staff and the hospital administrators, like all of the stakeholders that it takes time, will be establishing a reputation among them. And it also means just an explosion of the neural data that ultimately goes to training our algorithms and making them more powerful. So we see this as a really important step towards clinical impact, which, as I said, is sort of the whole reason that Precision exists.
And next year we'll bring a new political environment with RFK Jr. Likely, he's going to oversee a big role in healthcare. Elon Musk, your direct competitor, has the president's ear. Do you see that as a good thing for the BCI industry, or are you worried about a little favoritism?
I think like everybody else, we're waiting to see what happens. I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's to have someone who really understands the technology, its importance, its potential to do something really good for people who right now have no therapy at a senior level in government. I think that's no bad thing. All that said, we as an industry don't need any special favors or treatment. The data will speak for itself. The patient benefit will speak for itself. I think that said, there are areas of, I think, potential improvement, not just for brain-computer interfaces or companies like mine, but for medical device companies more generally. So I'll give you a quick example. Right now, there is on average a several-year gap between an FDA approval and when CMS, which is Medicare and Medicaid, decides to cover a novel device. That's totally different from how it works in pharma. Pharma generally gets reimbursement right after approval. And just from like a first principle standpoint, no one would design a system like that. No one would design a system where you get FDA approval and then it's several more years of work and validation before insurance companies can cover a device. And private insurance generally for devices take their cues from CMS. This ultimately means it's more difficult for medical device companies to raise capital and develop devices. You have to go through the whole regulatory journey and then continue to fund the company for several more years while you go through the reimbursement path. And it ultimately means that patients who stand to benefit from this technology don't get it in a timely basis. So it's not a system that makes a whole lot of sense. The Trump administration actually late in their term passed a rule that said that any device that has been given breakthrough status with the FDA would automatically get reimbursement for a fixed amount of time. But the rule was never totally funded or implemented and was later reversed. I think something like that would be enormously helpful in just providing clarity to the medical device industry and ultimately would speed access to important technology to patients.
And before we go, I have to ask, Bloomberg has a report out that you raised $93 million last week at a valuation of $500 million. Can you confirm that today?
I am constrained in what I can say. I can confirm that article was based on a regulatory filing, which is accurate. I can say that, to my knowledge, it's the largest capital raise of a brain-computer interface company of its kind, other than what Neuralink has reported. And I will have more to say on this in a few weeks, but beyond that, I can't say. Sorry.
And is an IPO in your future? How important do you think that is to Precision's growth?
There are different ways of developing a medical device company. I think the typical, the most common way is to try to prove the efficacy and safety of a device and then sell it to a company that has a massive distribution platform like Boston Scientific or Medtronic. We view brain-computer interfaces as a generationally important life sciences innovation, and one that really is, people say platform technology, but we think that this is going to have applicability today in paralysis, tomorrow in a number of different areas. We tried to build this company from the very beginning to go the distance. Who knows if we get there, but that's what we're working towards.
Thank you so much. Michael Mager, Precision Neuroscience.
Thanks, Yasmin.